This lesson starts the second stage of the course, Intelligence Thinking and Requirement Management. The title, Information is Not Intelligence, is the whole point of the lesson. A lot of beginner OSINT work looks busy. There are screenshots, links, and facts everywhere. But when you read the final output, the real question is still missing. What does any of this actually mean? Imagine you are checking a company. You have the address, a few announcements, some hiring changes, and maybe a lawsuit record. Those items are useful, but they are still raw material. They only become useful when you can connect them to a question, add context, and explain a judgment. So this lesson is about the move from collected material to explainable judgment. By the end, you should be able to say where a clue sits on the ladder and what it can truly support. In real investigations, the problem is usually not that the internet is empty. The problem is that the material does not yet say enough on its own. Take company verification. You may find an address, an announcement, a hiring page, and a lawsuit record. Each one is real enough to record, but none of them automatically tells you whether the company is healthy, risky, or worth trusting. The key is context. If hiring is shrinking, project delays are appearing, and contract disputes are rising in the same period, then the material starts to point in one direction. Now you can make a careful judgment instead of a loose guess. That is why we start here. We are not teaching people to collect more files. We are teaching them to understand what a file can and cannot say. Beginners usually run into the same three traps. The first is moving too fast. They see one lawsuit, one old image, or one similar username, and jump straight to a conclusion. The second is confirmation bias. Once they think they know the answer, they keep only the material that agrees with them. The third is weak record keeping. They forget the source, the time, and the limits, so the report becomes hard to check later. A good habit here is to slow down and separate the pieces. What is the fact? What is the context? What is the evidence? What is still missing? If you cannot answer those questions clearly, the conclusion is too early. Let's put the four terms into plain English. Data is a small fact. A company name, an address, a date, a number, or a job title can all be data. Information is data with context. For example, a company published a project delay notice on a specific date. That is already more meaningful than a single isolated detail. Knowledge is when you begin to see relationships. If project delays, hiring contraction, and contract disputes all show up together, you start to understand the shape of the situation. Intelligence is the judgment that can support action. At that point, you can say something like, current public evidence suggests cooperation risk may be rising, and more verification is needed before making a decision. The workflow is simple to say, but important to follow. Facts, context, relationships, and judgment. Facts are the raw pieces. Context tells you when, where, and around what they appeared. Relationships tell you whether several clues are pushing in the same direction. Judgment is where you explain what the evidence supports and what it does not. For example, one complaint is a clue. Multiple complaints over 6 months, plus a media article and a regulatory notice, are a different story. The pattern is stronger, but it still needs careful wording. The reason this matters is practical. It keeps you from doing two things that ruin a report: piling up facts without interpretation or jumping to a conclusion without enough evidence. This framework shows up everywhere in OSINT. In a company check, it helps you avoid turning a single court record into a major claim. In news verification, it keeps you from treating a repost as proof. A repost proves that a claim is circulating, not that the event really happened. In account review, it stops you from overreading username similarity or avatar style as identity confirmation. That distinction is what makes OSINT useful. A clue is not always evidence. Evidence is not always enough for judgment. The method is about knowing the difference. When you actually do the work, use 4 steps. First, write the question. What are you trying to judge? Second, list the facts exactly as they appear. Do not interpret yet. Third, add context. Ask who published it, when it appeared, and how it relates to the case. Fourth, write a bounded judgment. Say what the evidence supports, what it does not support, and what should be checked next. That last part matters. A good judgment is not one that sounds strong. It is one that is honest about its limits. Let's walk through a small company case. Suppose you find several recent contract disputes, a reduction in hiring, and a delayed project notice. Start with the visible facts: dates, case numbers, job postings, and the wording of the announcement. Then add context. Are these events clustered in the same period? Do they point to the same business line? Is the dispute serious or minor? Is the hiring drop temporary or part of a longer trend? Once you connect the pieces, a careful judgment becomes possible. You might say that public evidence suggests delivery pressure or operational stress, but the case still needs financial evidence and customer-side verification before the conclusion gets stronger. Notice the tone. We are not saying the company is doomed. We are saying the evidence points in a direction, and we know what is still missing. A lot of reports look polished but still fail on basic logic. One common problem is the screenshot pile. The folder is full, but the evidence is repetitive or low quality. Another is mixing old and new material as if they belong to the same moment. A 3-year-old lawsuit and a current hiring page do not mean the same thing. A third problem is repeating a claim many times and mistaking repetition for proof. The fix is simple. Go back to facts, context, and relationships. If a piece of material cannot help you answer one of those three, it probably should not sit in the final conclusion. The output for this lesson should be something another person can review. Use a table with a question, sources, evidence, judgment, limits, and next steps. If the source is a court record, say what it proves and what it does not prove. If the evidence is thin, say so. If the judgment is only preliminary, write that down too. That kind of output is much more useful than a screenshot wall. It tells the reader what you saw, why it matters, and what should happen next. Pick one public item and work it through the framework. It can be a company notice, a news post, a screenshot, or a public account. First write the raw data. Then add the context. Then write what it can support. Then write what it cannot support. Finish with one careful judgment sentence and one uncertainty note. For example, the screenshot shows that the claim is circulating, but the original source has not been found, so the claim is still unconfirmed. That may sound modest, but it is professional. It is much better than pretending to know more than the evidence actually says. The main takeaway is simple. Information becomes intelligence only after context, connection, and judgment. Do not stop at collecting material. Ask what it means, how strong it is, and what is still missing. Separate what you know, what you infer, and what you cannot yet prove. That habit will carry into every later lesson. Next, we will move into the intelligence cycle so you can see how a real investigation flows from a need, to collection, to analysis, to delivery, and then back to new questions.